Candor. Senior NCOs, I'll tell you flat out. I hear a lot of people say, well, this is political. They got a promotion because it's political. They got to go in this mobilization, it's political. Politics, Mike's opinion, is an extension of human interaction. That is a consequence. That's how we are. I don't love it. Don't make that your mark. But you can't ignore it either. And you learn how to play it professionally and ethically, but politics matter. If people are involved, there's politics. It's just human nature.
Sounds complicated.
It is. Human terrain, very difficult.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rhode Island National Guard podcast. I'm your host, Major Mark Insha. Today on the podcast, we had Army Colonel retired Mike Cote, a former battalion commander here at the Rhode Island National Guard, spent 20 years in the AGR system, a few years in the Air Force prior to that. He shared a lot of perspective and lessons learned over those 30 years, from the beginning all the way through the end. He shared with me a little bit about some insights he gained from experiences overseas. We spent a little time talking about the right way to mentor and grow junior officers. We talked a little bit about how one might, for themselves, identify the want or desire to lead a 30-year career and what we would have to do to pursue that. We talked a little bit about his experience overseas and how things he experienced, things he saw over there changed his perspective and gave him a new way of looking at his own service. If that sounds like the kind of conversation that would be of benefit to you, I invite you to join us. I found it to be a very rewarding conversation, and I hope you do too. All right, so just to start out with, sir, why don't you remind me what your career was like? You were in for a hot minute.
About 30 years of hot minutes. ROTC kid. Looked interesting. Sophomore year of college, joined. The only one nearby was Air Force. So did that route. Knew nothing in the military. And got my commission and couldn't stand it. Went to security forces, loved it. I got married, which was a whole change of life and direction. Ended up in Rhode Island, joined the Guard just about the time the Iraq War kicked off. AGR positions were opening up, right place, right time. And then worked my way into the MPs and state headquarters. And 30 years later, we're sitting in a chair talking about what it was like.
Okay. So ROTC, no prior service prior to that.
Correct.
Excuse me. So what possessed you to walk into, not a recruiter's office?
No.
It's probably like a contracting office. Well, different type of contracting officer, probably.
No, I was a football player in high school, and I was too small to play in college. So I wanted something that was interesting, physical. Quite honestly, probably too many John Wayne movies when I was a kid. So it was appealing. Read the flyer and said, why not? And I think that's about all the thought I put into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder what percentage of our force that would be a true story for. Like, I didn't really think too much about it. I just walked into it. I
really didn't. Just, I think this would be fun. And that was really it. I mean, we spent a career on planning and leadership and analysis and critical thinking. Yet the biggest decision of my life was, that looks fun.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe mine wasn't quite so random as that, but it was, I was exploring my options, and I sat with a recruiter. My best friend and I sat with the same recruiter, asked a handful of questions, and Adam Vita, I don't know if you remember Adam Vita.
No.
Super good dude. He knew my psychology perfectly. Like, he read me like a map. Is that the expression? Read me like a map? Reverse psychology me into the Army really easily. So I talked with all the recruiters, and Adam Vita was the only one who went the, you wouldn't like the National Guard. You're too heady. You know, it's a rough place for rough guys, and you're just not one of them. I'm like, what are you talking about? Give me that paper. Here I am 15 years later.
That works.
Back. Yeah, it worked. Absolutely
all right.
So sometimes kind of random decisions or getting psychologied can end up in interesting places. But 30 years is a long time.
Yes.
So I'm at 15, and I'm looking forward at another 15.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Truthfully, I think a lot of it is it is your opportunity in timing. And if you've got the basics. Rising tide lifts all boats to a point, probably to 05. And then from there, there's lots of things in play. But, reflecting back, some of the very simple things that you would hear and probably dismiss as a younger officer resonate a bit more. And, when they throw things out, whether it was Air Force or Army, hear the values, right? And you just think, it's a phrase. It's a nice thing to put on a poster. They have to say it. But after a while, you look back on some of those things, you're like, oh, yeah, that's about what you get that down, you'll do just fine. It's the simplest form of instructions. So you work hard, you put the service before yourself most times. You take care of people. And I think if you generally like what you do, you like this as a calling, and you get it, 30 years is not unobtainable.
Okay. Did you always know you were going to do 30 years?
No, I thought I would do 6 to 10 and get out. So I was in ROTC in 1992, which was during reduction in force. It was President Clinton. And, the whole Cold War was thawed. And I wanted a pilot slot because that's what you do when you're in Air Force ROTC. I'd never been in a plane other than fly to Florida. And I said, well, that looks cool. Let's try that. So they gave out 100 slots in ROTC. I was lucky to get one of them. But when I went down to fly, I couldn't solo in 10 hours, maybe 30, but there was no way. So that was the end of that. And I figured, well, there's no career for me if you're not flying, because everything you hear in ROTC is if you're not flying, you're not flying. So
what does it mean to solo in 10 hours? I don't follow.
So if you've never flown a plane before, they'll give you 5 hours of basic instruction, an hour each day. And then at the hours of 6 through 10, you master lessons 1 through 5. Lesson 5 being how to land the plane, fly solo. So take you from never done it to solo in 10 hours of flight. Very difficult to do. Most don't. So I had to go find something else, and didn't really think there was much of a career until somebody said, well, go to contracting. You'll set yourself up for a lot of money later on. And I said, well, I better do that. So I jumped into contracting, figured I'd get all my certifications, get out and try and get a job, because there's no career for me as a Air Force officer.
Okay. Sounds like Air Force has a very similar. So I was a ROTC kid in the Army, and we had what sounds like a very similar culture, which is you go infantry or don't bother.
Yeah.
The ROTC on the green side of the house did a very good job of convincing everyone they wanted to be a ranger. Sorry, my mic is behaving very strangely. Of course, I was coming from the infantry. I was a prior service infantry guy, and did not fall for that at all. I knew I didn't want to be an infantry guy. I wonder if that's true of any of your prior service Air Force compadre feel that way about flying?
I don't know. I do know that you fast forward a few years, and I'm a operations officer in security forces, Canada Air Force Base. And there's only 3 officers in the squadron. There's the commander, the operations officer, and a new lieutenant who's usually in supply and training. So you got a lot of responsibility. Commander's doing commander stuff. You're running day-to-day operations, flight line security and, entry control, all that stuff. So a lot of leadership, a lot of responsibility, and a lot of the pilots I knew, there's 40 or 50 of them in a squadron, and they don't get a lot of leadership opportunities. They get a lot of stick time, and it's cool to fly an F-16, but they were telling me, hey, you've got things I can't get. I kind of wish I had some of that too, which I never would have expected.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. Army aviation has a very similar career trajectory. I remember I graduated and commissioned with a kid in 2012. I commissioned, and one of my classmates commissioned same day. He was actually seated 2 officers to the left of me during our commissioning ceremony. we both deployed to Iraq at the same time. And I went as the Echo Company Commander. I had about 100 guys working for me at Company Command. And while we were there, about halfway through the deployment, give or take, he finally got through his whatever qualification he needed to do, become a pilot in command.
Yeah.
So his very first leadership experience was 5.5 years into commissioning, and he got what would amount to about a fire team's worth of individuals working for him. So some communities just have that. They don't get a leadership opportunity until a little further down the road. Now that you've got 30 years experience under your belt and you can look back, do you think that early advantage to some career paths, leads to, or do you think you need that extra sets and reps to learn some stuff early on, or is that a closable gap, I guess, in experience?
Depends. Some elements are closable. Some are not. Specifically, if you're a younger officer and you're in charge, I think there's more room to make those initial mistakes. You've usually got senior NCOs looking out for you, or looking out for the troops in spite of you. Chiefs in the Air Force, sergeant majors in the Army, or just senior NCOs. More the NCOs than the officers. So you make your mistakes in a controlled environment. Sometimes not. But I thought there was a little more latitude to learn in a more wide open environment. I think if you get your first leadership experience at senior company grade or even field grade, there's more expectation that you're going to have. There's less margin for learning, and there's a greater emphasis on solid execution, timely execution, thorough analysis, critical thinking, all those things that someone who's a specialist may not necessarily have to the same degree.
It gets said by a lot of people that mistakes will teach you faster than successes.
Depends. So you can have a terrible slice in golf, but if you don't have someone to kind of help you learn from your mistake and get you hitting it, straight down the green, you're going to keep making the same mistake. It may not be the best analogy, but we're all going to make mistakes. Well, so what? Very often it's, and I've seen, it's somebody else's fault, or I'm just no good. You get extremes, but very often you've got a mentor or some good friends or your boss will sit you down and say, okay, this is where this went south. Let's look at it. Let's analyze it. Let's be constructive. How are you going to learn from it? And, that conversation can happen. Excuse me. Problem with longer hair.
A privilege some of us don't have.
It is. I'm enjoying it. How you deal with the mistake and how you get through it and how you learn from it, you need some help. You don't always have the skills to do that yourself. So experience without some sort of focused correction or growth just adds up to lots of mistakes.
Okay. I had a sensei who said something very similar. He always objected to the expression, practice makes perfect. He'd always jump in and correct you. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And then would proceed to give you feedback very similar to how you describe.
Yeah.
Is that an opinion you've always had, or is that a learned position that you've got?
No, it's learned. That's learned. And it's usually painful because, as a young officer, you really don't want to hear it from anybody, right? I'm an ROTC graduate. I got a commission. I know what I'm doing. Don't tell me. And very often those candid, needed to hear conversations where, E7s pulling me aside, hey LT, hey Cap, let's have a talk. And had quite a few, as a young officer, and those were invaluable. Those were invaluable. Hard to hear. You don't want to hear it, but it was necessary.
What was the hardest one to hear?
Ooh, the hardest one I think that I recall as a young officer in the security forces was, hey, it's not your job to be friends of the troops. You can be friendly, but there has to be a distance that you maintain. And it's very easy, because you're all the same age, to cloud that at different times. And to hear really from an NCO, you need to mature and grow up as an officer, because you're making some mistakes. And he was very professional about it. He was a brilliant human being, good person, new officers, new enlisted. Explained to me that they're both equal. They just have a different purpose. But yours is not to be their buddy. Very easy to do.
Oh, yeah.
Very easy to do. And that was hard to hear, because then you're backing off, and that has an effect on the relationships you built, right? So that was tough, but necessary.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Two things I want to just sort of dig into. I just want to point out that you're absolutely right that when you correct a behavior, everything you had built on that behavior to that point gets either damaged or goes away completely.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really hard. Yeah, this mic is killing me. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. So first point, it when you are forced to correct a behavior, everything you'd built on that behavior goes away, and that can be really hard. If you've made friends where you shouldn't have, and then the next day you wake up and you're like, I've got to correct this. It hurts giving up friends.
Yes.
Giving up friends.
Yeah.
And I find that this is a lesson I have to learn more than once. That it was a really obvious lesson to me when I was a platoon leader and a company commander. And then I got to staff. And the relationship with someone when I'm just a staff officer and they're a staff NCO, because now we're both older, we're a little bit more mature, and the burden of leadership or the requirement of leadership is slightly different.
Yeah.
How did you walk that line?
I looked at it like IPB, right? Intelligence Preparation of the Battlefield. And that was one of the courses I took when I came over to the Army. And essentially, you look at your map, you look at your mission, you look at your op order, and it's a maneuver thing. But what's the terrain tell me? What are my go, no-go, slow-go areas? What are the target reference points? Where's the enemy most likely to go? All those basic sort of combat preparation skills, really apply to many things in life. And I'm a very simple person, so I try to find little lessons I've learned and apply them to many, many things. But your terrain at staff as a field grade officer is different than the one you had as a platoon leader. And you have there's different terrain that you can navigate that you couldn't before. And the relationship that you build with an NCO under these conditions may require a different relationship than the one that's got, that polite but distant relationship. The culture of the organization. Are you at a division headquarters, in the active component overseas in theater, or is it garrison back home? What's your mission? So I found that many situations and contexts change. There are some fundamentals to leadership, right? There's lines you don't cross, but I think the gray area and the nuance that comes between being a company grade officer and a field grade officer, or a good staff officer and a good field leader change. And so as an officer, if you can bounce between all those different situations, assess them fairly quickly, and know the best way to behave and act is where you're going to earn your money. So I wouldn't apply what you did as a platoon leader or what I did as a operations officer to what I may do here on staff.
Okay. How is the distance you kept from your soldiers similar and or different from the distance you kept as a senior officer to a junior officer. So you had battalion command.
I did.
So you had officers that worked for you in a very similar way to how soldiers worked for you when you were a
Yes.
operations officer.
Yeah. There, at least to me, as a battalion commander, you were more conscious of being a mentor, a leader. There were different risks. So there was a natural, it was more of a, older big brother to little brother or little sister in some ways. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it but there was they've got to learn from you. And that, well, I can't get friendly with you, one, because I've grown way beyond what you're doing. And I don't want to get together with all the other CGOs after, training or whatever. You learn to be kind of alone by position. You're alone. Where on staff, it may be slightly more familiar. Training someone or teaching someone, there's different skills. It may be, how to speak, without getting too nervous in public. It may be how to do it's a computer program or staff work. So that sort of field relationship just doesn't work. So it's, I guess there's a point where you sense, okay, there's the line where this would be too friendly, or this would be perceived as being, well, they're buds, versus, oh, well, any one of us get the same treatment. So it's gray. It's fine tuning. It's gray. It's funny. We're all part of the animal kingdom, right? We're pack animals. We're social beings. And yet in leadership and command, you find very often you're on your own. You got to be alone. You got to be comfortable with it. You've got to have the answers. You have to shoulder different burdens. And it almost works against you, which you go back to your other question as to why sometimes it's better when you're younger to learn some of these things, because they have to build upon each other to get to the point where you naturally fill the role as a mid to senior commander with a different understanding.
Do you have a guiding philosophy or a central tenet, a North Star for raising junior officers?
No, it's probably like a star cluster,
Okay.
Because there's a couple that are way out here, and then there's some that are probably common to most. So you get what you get as far as your unit, your troops. You really don't get to pick and choose. So they've all got talent, they've all got skills, they've all got hang-ups, issues, and you've got to get this group of people to do, these different tasks. Your 100% may not be my 100%. I may be at my best day of 40%er, but that's all I can give, right? So what do I do with that? How do I get the most out of who I have? How do you find that mix where they feel that they're actively contributing, they're part of something, but, still if they can't keep up, you're not putting them in a position where they're going to fail or they're going to hurt the mission. So I guess it's, how do I assess what their strengths and weaknesses are? Maybe in some cases what their aspirations are, and how do I arrange that so that they work together, they're contributing, they feel vested, because that matters, and I get the most out of them. So however I have to do that, that's usually that guiding, theory, principle, whatever it may be.
I'm glad I've heard that out of somebody else's mouth now. I had a first sergeant I frequently had to say, Top, we can only play the cards we've been dealt. And if we drop a card out of our hand, the Army's not going to give us another.
No.
And I loved this first sergeant. He was like my Jiminy Cricket, but instead of a conscience, he was just the cynical, salty voice in
Sure.
sitting on my shoulder, which balanced me out really well. I was much too optimistic and kind of soft when I took company command. So he balanced me perfectly, but I'm glad I've heard that a similar expression from somebody else, that a replacement's not coming if we kick this one out for something that is salvageable. We're not getting another.
It's often misconstrued as just being too nice, and it's not really. It's in some ways it's Machiavellian, but I need to do what I need to do to get you to produce the best I can. I need you. Manipulation, call it what you will. I need all of you to get this done, and I need you to buy in. I need you to work together. Now, there are those that just simply don't care, and that's when I go down the road of, okay, there's really only so much effort I can put into you, and now we need to remove you because now it affects the others, and that happens. But you are you got to work with what you're given. You really do. On the flip side, as a staff guy, you'd say, well, the Army's put hundreds of thousands of dollars in every one of these soldiers, right? And they're going to say, well, hang on. They went to all these courses and they went to all this training and all this good money and investment. So, yeah, you figure it out. Lieutenant, captain, major, whatever it may be. That can be tough. It can be frustrating.
Yeah.
But, the simple answer of, well, just get a new one or get rid of them or get more people, it just doesn't happen. So the sooner you learn how to work with it, the better off you'll be.
How do you draw the line between salvageable and unsalvageable?
I call it the give a darn factor. If they're trying, they're genuinely trying. They want to be part of something. They want to be here. Well, you're salvageable. Salvageable. That doesn't sound right, but you're then you're a valuable member of the team if you want to be here, right? Because in its simplest form, we're here to serve. I want to serve my country. So this is volunteer force. So if somebody said, I want to serve my country, and maybe they're not as smart as everybody else, maybe they don't run as fast, but I'm willing to give up the same thing as everybody else. Well, that's equal. So, some ways, well, who am I to say you can't contribute because you're not, a team. So, there's a sense of humanity and humility in there too, as to looking at it more than just, if you're not just hitting home runs, well, then I don't have use for you, because I think that's a failure of leadership. So if you care, you're trying. That's all I ask.
So you retired this past spring.
Yes.
And then decided you wanted to hang out a little bit more with us.
Sure.
What brought you back?
Not really wanting to leave it.
Okay.
And I don't say that as afraid of what's on the outside. But I'd been around enough, and I have enough friends and family who are in the civilian sector to know that the military is a different place, even as a civilian. And it made me want to serve. As a 19-year-old, isn't really any different than as a 39-year-old, right? So, so you want to serve, and it's a different capacity, but you still want to. Like, if the organization says, "Hey, we think you have some value, and you can contribute," we'd like you to stick around. To me, it's an honor. It sounds corny, but it is. You're like, wow, okay, yeah. So they say it's a calling. You don't leave a calling. You don't, right? So you want to be valuable. So if that's there and you have the opportunity, it's fulfilling. Just, I respect what I do, even as a, guy wearing a sweater and long hair and, all that stuff and goofy socks, but I respect what I do, and I'm still proud to be a part of it, and so I was happy to have the opportunity.
Did waking up and putting product in nice long hair and putting on a pair of slacks, has your perspective changed on anything over the last 30 years? Do you look back and see it differently now than you did, say, in March or February?
In some ways, you got to know when it's time to go. You have to. Self-awareness is a very painful thing. It's an unsettling thing, but you have to know when you are at the top of your particular game, right? You may only be able to run a 4.9 in the 40. But if that's top of your game and you're running 5.2, well, maybe it's time to stop running or stop competing. So that wasn't quite the case. I was never 4.9. But, for me, it was, it's time to move on. This time I think I'm at my peak, and that's a good time to go. And it's a good time. If I've done my job, there's people coming behind me who are ready to take over, and it's time for me to go move on to something else. So I think if you feel you did everything you could or you left it all on the field, then it's not so hard to go.
Sounds like it might have been a tough conversation to have with yourself.
Well, again, if you practice self-awareness, and usually there's people to help you with that. There's always people to help you with that. There's little things that you realize, right? So, you start falling apart. You find you're on profiles. You're never on profiles. So that's a little indicator that, okay, I'm not quite at 100% anymore. Where maybe knowledge-wise you're still growing, but there's that complete officer piece that some things are just, and I did you have personal goals, and I met them. I was able to exceed a few of them. So I felt satisfied. So yeah, it was. Sometimes the realization is somewhat unsettling. You pause a minute, but then, you can live with it.
That's fair. I do have the benefit of having a mentee who's like right behind me. So I know about 30 seconds after I slow my pace even a hair, I'm done for. So that's my motivation for the next 15 years.
Time to diversify.
But no, you said there's always someone to help you with some self-awareness.
Yes.
Walk me through that.
Well, your peers, however they present it, whether it's over a beer or whether it's usually it's joking, but they'll call you out on something that you do, and they'll bring it up once or twice. And you're like, oh, that's a thing. Rarely you'll have a good friend, maybe a family member, maybe a spouse who will say, you're really terrible at this. And they don't say terrible.
What do they say?
You really suck at this,
Oh, okay.
You'll get you come home and you're moaning and groaning about X, Y, and Z. Well, take care of it at work. Or why don't you, or sometimes your friends will be like, hey, you need to go talk to your boss, or you have a good cohort. And again, senior NCOs they won't always offer it, especially as you grow up in rank. But if you ask, if you have a good relationship with a few of them, they'll tell you flat out, because they want to see you succeed. They do. And chiefs, they'll tell you, chief warrant officers, yeah, no problem there. They'll tell you.
Yeah, that's fair. So there's at least one reason then to keep a group of people you trust close by as you progress through your career.
Yes. Because your ratings won't always reflect your shortcomings. And it's just the system. It's the way it is. I've seen very few candid evaluations. They're subtle, and if you read subtlety, it's fine. But the candid things you need to hear very rarely make it to an evaluation. So you look at them, everybody feels, great. Oh, this is great, right up, and you don't always get that. So it's usually peers and a few mentors. We'll tell you, and that's the value in having them. And as a leader or a boss, if you can find a way to approach that with someone without crushing them, because people are sensitive, and they learn from it, then, good on you. That's tough to do.
Did you ever have to tell one of your friends that it was time for them to hang up the hat?
Oh, sure. There were times I had to tell them, or should. I didn't do a very good job of it because, let's be honest, you You're gonna tell a good friend, yeah, you're in over your head, or you're making mistakes, or you're 2 ranks beyond where we all know you should have been. What usually happens is you wait for them to say something like, well, maybe I should look at something else, and then you jump on it and say, yeah, you know what, you're really good at doing this. You're a great salesperson. You could sell anything. Why don't you try that? You might really enjoy it. And that's kind of a passive way to, but I read some Jack Welch books, and he was big on you candor. Great, makes sense. Very hard to do. Very hard to do. And it will cost you relationships, and but if it's if you're worried about the bottom line of the mission, well, I guess then those are expendable, but that's hard. That's hard. For as much as I said, we're taught to be leaders and individuals, but we are a very cliquey group, and we run in packs. So you don't want to lose an ally either. Let's be honest, right? You don't want to burn bridges. You need friends. Anybody's watched Survivor. You need friends and relationships. Telling them it's time to go may not be to your interest. And that is a political reality of many professions.
Sounds complicated.
It is. It is. The human terrain, very difficult. Very difficult. And I'll say on politics, and I'm sorry if I'm cutting off a question, but I hear a lot of people say, well, this is political. They got a promotion because it's political. They got to go in this mobilization. It's political. Politics, Mike's opinion, is an extension of that's human interaction. That is a consequence. That's how we are. I don't love it. Don't make that your mark, but you can't ignore it either. And you learn how to play it professionally and ethically, but politics matter. If people are involved, there's politics. It's just human nature. And that doesn't mean that if you're not politically connected that you won't get ahead. No, not at all. But that is just how people interact. And I think as soon as you see that as just life, then you learn how to navigate it well. I took a course. It was a professional development course, civilian school, and the instructor gave it was like a 100-question test. And you can take as many times as you want, right? So answer these questions. It'll tell you if you have a likelihood of success as a mid to senior manager in corporate America, right? So I said, all right, I'll take it. So I took it the first time, answered it. I took the Boy Scout answer, right? And it came out and said, you have really very little chance of success as a mid to senior level manager. So I said, all right, I'll go the other way, right? I'll do all the backdoor, sneaky, underhanded tricks, that sort of thing. And same answer. You have very little chance at success. And then I answered it with, well, here's what I've learned. And I answered it that way. So sometimes, someone says, hey, help me set up my swing set on a Saturday afternoon. And it's somebody that you think is, I want to be aligned with, or it's a senior person who says, hey, look, can you just give me a hand? And, and the answer was, yeah, sometimes you help them out. Sometimes you do that. Don't cross the line, but, that's the reality. And so if you answer the maybe the more realistic way, and they say you've got a reasonable chance of surviving, and they emphasize the line between what's ethical and fair and what's not, but there is gray area, and you have to learn how to survive in that. But you don't want to be a politician. You don't want that to be your brand.
Yeah.
Or necessarily a Boy Scout.
No. Boy Scouts have a bad habit of getting walked on, overused, burned out, and become jaded. There certainly was a time I was on the outside looking in, and I was the guy making those statements. It's all politics. It all looks like politics from where I'm standing.
Oh, that's part of being a major.
Oh, this was a long time ago.
Okay.
And then as I've stuck around, so I'm on year 15 right now, and I've worked up at Joint Force Headquarters for about 8 years now, and I've seen it a lot more. And the higher I go and the deeper I get, just the more complicated it all is.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone says it's all politics, I can't tell them they're black and white wrong.
Yeah.
I can't tell them they're black and white right either. It's
not black and white.
It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
One of the things I do, I have a lot of soldiers who come to me and they ask me one of two things, or both things. Do I recommend the full-time program here? They're looking at an AGR job or a tech job,
right.
and they want to know if they should apply. And then usually the follow-up is, hey, will you write me a letter of recommendation? And I have this canned speech I give them every time.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell them that one of the key deciding factors that you need to make for yourself and that the board will make regarding you is, do they want you as a coworker for the next 20 years? Which speaks a little bit to the
Sure.
How are you going to interact because we're a small force, right? I mean, our full-time force is like, 650 people, something like that.
Give or take, yeah.
So we all know each other,
Yes.
right? Like, we know who drives what car, so we can tell who's at work every day.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's incredible the level of knowledge we have of one
Mm-hmm.
another in a force our size. And we'll end up working together multiple times over the next 25 years, 30 years, however long your career is. So that question of who are you as a coworker and does anyone want you around as a coworker, it matters
Yeah, it does.
a lot. And so when I write a letter of recommendation, which I don't do for people I don't recommend, I only write letters for people I do recommend. I always make a comment in there. Do I believe this person is the kind of person I would want as a coworker for the next 25 to 30 years? Because to me,
That's a very telling statement to include. That's pretty interesting.
I have a pretty good track record. I've written 5 letters of recommendation, and 4 of them have been picked up in the full-time program here.
All right.
And one of them is currently an ADOS worker and very likely to get picked up
Yeah.
at some point. So I'll be 5 for 5 at some point.
That's good. Yeah, Google does that, right? Is this somebody you'd want to, have a coffee with, have a beer with? But I mean, think about it. If you don't want to work with them in this environment, the Tuesday through Friday, the 10-hour days, or the best of times, right? And if anyone thinks this isn't the best of times, they're crazy. How are you going to work with them under stress? Right. So that's, some of us old dogs who went over when, 2004, 2005, 2006. I don't care where you were. It's stressful days, even as a staff officer. And if these are not people that you can work with when things are fine, you're sure as heck not going to work with them well when you need to. So, that's not a fluff statement to put on there. Like, this is somebody I'd work with. Like, that matters. That matters. In the greater your experience and the greater your frame of reference gives greater weight to the statement. That, I'd really like to work with this person under whatever conditions. That's a good endorsement.
I feel like it's one of the more important things I can say about someone.
Sure.
It's like, because in each case I've observed them for some short period of time. Maybe it was an M-Day relationship. I saw them 16 hours a month for a year.
Yeah.
Some of them I deployed with, and I saw a lot of them, but it's still a very narrow set of things I've seen them do.
And I'll go you one more. So, as you get higher in wherever you work, you'll sit, whether it's a battalion, brigade, or even up at state, and you'll sit in a room and you'll have, a list of names of people for who, it's time for them to move, right? What positions could they go? And you've got supervisors there and, all right, here's the next name of somebody who's been in the position for quite a few years. They need to move. And there will undoubtedly be, officers or NCOs who everyone at the table says, I want them, right? So that's not only do they get along, but superiors see them as good subordinates. They know they get along with people. Like, to me, that is a holistic endorsement that's even better than an OER, because you get the candid, no, I want them working for me. Now, who's going to hire somebody that isn't going to perform, isn't going to behave, isn't going to do great things, who's going to pick up the phone when it's 8:00 at night on Friday? right? I mean, those are all the things that instantly come into mind when call it a draft table, and there will be officers. And listen, any senior group of people, you have very different personalities. They're not all the same person. I mean, they all look the same, same uniform and regs and all that stuff, but they're very different people. And some are managers people like, some are ones they don't, but they all want the same person, and that tells you that's probably a pretty solid officer right there. And then you get some where you gotta say, okay, you get down to some tough negotiations because somebody's like, I don't know, I'm not willingly taking. That's a known problem. The paper doesn't say they're a known problem, but reality does.
Yeah, that's fair. I got only the tiniest taste of that building our DMD when we were deploying.
Yes.
And we had this list of volunteers, and there was like negotiations. Hey, we'd like to take this guy. Well, yeah, you can have that guy, but you've got to take this guy and this guy too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So just the tiniest taste of that.
And you get the list of here's who's off limits.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, well, why? But I'm going, and they're like, no, we need them. They're absolutely essential.
Yep. Yeah. And I wasn't there for those conversations. It's at the time, 03 staff level officer. You get the list and you're already told like these guys are off limits. Don't even work with, don't plug them in. Don't come to me with a COA that uses these names. What happened behind the scenes?
Well, I'll get people that will come into my office, usually subordinates or people that worked with me before, and they'll say, well, I don't know where I stand. Am I good for promotion? They like me, that this, where do I really stand? And it's a fair question because very few people will come into your office and say, everybody likes how you're performing and you got a super bright future. Because I can change, right? And people don't do that. Nor do they come in and say, you're not even in the ballpark. You think you're awesome, but no. It just doesn't work that way. And I said, well, how many people come into your office to seek your advice? Not to gossip, not to complain, but come in and say, I have a decision to make or I have a problem, and I really would like your input. And if your peers do that, that's a vote of confidence. If your subordinates do, that's 50-50, right? Sometimes they really need your help. Sometimes they just want the face time, and that's nature. How many superiors come in your office and say, hey, Mark, I got this dilemma. I want to know your thoughts, right? Because right there they're saying, we think you're ethical. We think you're bright. We think, how you conduct yourselves or yourself is right on. And I want to risk my reputation or my position by, seeking your advice and maybe applying it. So if that's something that happens on a fairly recent basis, then I would say you're in good standing legitimately. You're someone that's respected and valued, and then conversely, if it's crickets, if you're waiting for the janitor to come dump the trash so you got somebody to talk to, maybe you ought to ask why. Because if you're looking at your resume and you're like, wait, I got all these great things, that's that self-awareness thing. That's when you start asking.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
And when people avoid answering, yeah.
So this may be some hybrid. This opinion may be some hybrid of having sat in the S1 seat for a little too long and being a little too optimistic about things. But I tend to think or assume it is my responsibility as a leader to build subordinates who meet that qualification. And I like to use the tools the Army's given me to do that. We touched very briefly on evaluations a couple minutes ago.
Right.
Which I've come to really appreciate. Now I know I've been in the S1 seat a little too long. I love the Army's evaluation system. And I actually appreciate some of the subtleties of the way it works.
Yeah.
I appreciate them as a subtle.
There's an art to it.
Which I've really enjoyed uncoding and then trying to teach people how to use. Because there's plenty of people out there who haven't learned the subtleties, and they write evaluations that are just either much harsher than they intend them to be, or
excuse me,
or otherwise the evaluation doesn't accomplish what they've set out to do. So teaching people how to use them has been a crusade of mine. But I lean on those tools because I think it's my responsibility, and I think I can accomplish it, to train my lieutenants. I don't have very many anymore, just one at a time. But to train my lieutenants to be that person that others go to and seek their advice. You ever seen it work? You've been in for a hot minute. You ever seen that system work?
So I grew up in Jersey, so I'm a natural cynic, and I'm older, so I'm even more so. I think that you try. I think really is what matters most. So it'll work on some, it won't work on others. It'll work to varying degrees. But you are dedicated enough or care enough to try, so you'll get some results. There's a part of me, though, that thinks there are those subordinates that are going to get it and those that won't. And so there's a kind of a mix. How much effort am I going to invest, or to what degree, and what's the mission return on the investment? And that sounds kind of harsh. Maybe it is, but you only have so much time. You only have so much bandwidth. You only have so much time to mentor, because there's other things you got to do. And you're looking for maximum return on the time that I invest showing you how to do something. Now, when you're more junior, and I go back to what you said in the beginning about having these experience when you're younger, and I mentioned NCOs, because there's a lot of those basics that get handled at that level through NCOs and senior NCOs. So as you progress, and senior officers say, Mark gets it, come here, and I'm going to give you basics of what you need to do, some basic feedback, and go. So it's a lot of OJT versus focused training. So it's awesome you're doing it. May not always have the time, and that's where the struggle comes in, because you get some that want so badly to learn and grow, and you're like, you do your best, you try, but there's times where you're gonna focus, where you're gonna get the most out of your people. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of that formal environment, that dedicated class type environment, and that's hard, because if you care, you see somebody who's not keeping up, and you're trying to give them this, but they need there was a quadrant we learned about years ago in ROTC. It was like 4 blocks, and the lower left block needs the most attention, the most feedback, the most instruction and oversight. And then you got subordinates who are on the opposite, who need minimal instruction, minimal oversight, minimal, pats on the head. And that's optimal. And then you get varying degrees in the middle, depending on how serious your mission is or how much time you have. Often depends on who you're going to go to and who's going to get that opportunity. So some of it is that IPB, that context. So you're making the most of it now, and I commend you for it, because it's the time. But there'll be a time where you don't have that. It's more cutthroat, it's more cold, it's more, it's rare, but that does happen.
I can definitely see that. There's absolutely a special place in my, not inner circle. I don't have an inner circle. It's nothing near as impressive as that. But there's a couple of soldiers and officers in my life who I describe as just pure fire and forget weapons. Like, I can sit in their cubicle, sit in their office, explain sort of an end state. Like, this is the thing that needs to happen, and I'm not going to call you again for another week because I've got so much to do. And I can sleep well at night knowing that, like, as long as I've vaguely described the end state, that they'll get there. So I definitely get it. So
those are the ones, when you get down into differentiating and saying my top 1, my top 2, because of things. Now, assuming their behavior in professional demeanor and ethics are all the same, at that high level, those are the ones you say, hey, this is the number 1. This will be anybody's number 1. And then the hard part is the ones that you really like, ones that are trying, the ones that just maybe remind you of you or your kid brother or your kid sister, but they're not there. And you want to give it to them. And they're trying so hard, but It's like, look, you're still with the training wheels. I can't. I'll write you the nicest things, but there's things I can't give you. That's hard. You feel alone when that happens.
That is hard. That you just said it. You see too much of yourself in them. You look back over your own career and you see things that you wish you had.
Yeah.
And you're like, I wish someone had said this to me, so I'm going to say it to them.
Yeah.
All right. I wish someone had done this for me, so I'm going to do it for them.
Yeah.
And you realize that guy really isn't me, or that girl isn't me. And this thing I've just done or said isn't helping them the way it, and maybe it wouldn't have helped me. Right. So that happens.
Or maybe you see yourself and you're like, yeah, I'm picking the other officer to do something. Right. And you're like, shoot, I wouldn't have been good enough back then. And yet I'm like, that's a little unsettling sometimes. You're like, shoot, So sometimes it's just the opportunities that get you where you are. You got the basics. We all have the basics. And self-awareness doesn't mean look back too far and then say, well, I really shouldn't be here, or I couldn't do it then. No, it's somewhat related. So I went to West Point for my out processing physical, and I was talking to the doctor, very, very brilliant officer, just very bright. He was a major. And I said, Did you go here? Did you go to school here? He's like, no, at 17, I wasn't there yet. He said, but now, he goes, we're all peers, we're all on the same plane. And it kind of struck me that there are different times in life when people are just at their peak, or they accelerate. So you may look back and say, that reminds me of me, and maybe it did. That doesn't mean that officer is going to accelerate or learn, or pick it up at 25 or 26, or maybe they will, So it's you do learn with people that they come in their own at different times. They really do. Some are brilliant at 16, 17, 18. They can do it all. They come out as lieutenants, and man, they're just way off the chart. And then there's some that are just, they're trudging through. But again, those younger experiences, you kind of get the rough stuff out of the way, and then they start to get it. And then that takes a few years.
Yeah.
So
that's true everywhere inside the Army and out.
It's like evaluating stocks. You got to know the fundamentals of the company to know the performance.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do.
My wife often says to me, like, I wish we had met in high school. And my response is always, no, you don't. You would not have liked me in high school, and we would not be married. Probably a very similar concept to what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think so.
And conversely, sometimes some of the slow start guys, whose names I'll avoid because I actually really like the guy and I can't wait to work for him one day, but commissioned only 1 year ahead of me, and was a slow start. If you had met him in college in the ROTC program I was in, you would not have assumed he would make it where he is today. And now he's maybe the strongest, certainly among the strongest in my peer group.
Wow.
And I can't wait to work for him one day.
Huh. That's a great example. And I might want to ask the name, but
I'll tell you when we're not recording.
Sure. but that means, like, when you evaluate talent, you yes, what you're getting is a snapshot in time. But if you're very astute and you've been around a little bit, you'll see the little indicators that this person's slowly coming into their own, and that's when you build really, really good, effective teams.
What advice do you have for a junior officer, junior NCO? You've been at it a while. You've got a perspective that a lot of our guests don't. What advice do you have for them?
Quit worrying about your peer group. Again, I go back to that pack animal thing. Don't measure yourself by how they're doing or what they're doing. You've got your talents, you've got your skills. Stick with them. Honestly, like, trust in your own abilities, and don't assume because somebody else gets an assignment that you may have wanted or gets an opportunity, that means that they're better than you, they're better than you. Don't get hung up on the fray. Just be very good at what your job is. be able to execute, be competent, you're going to go far. Very often I did the same. We worry about everything left and right. It's a competition, just be competent. There's not as many solidly competent people as they would tell you they are. We had great salesmen. There are great storytellers. But when push comes to shove, whether it's COVID, whether it's a deployment, and you really need somebody to be very competent, very reliable, very sound. It's if you're worried about what your peers are doing, it won't be you. So you're going to be fine. Just stick to what the Army tells you to do. It's a pretty good guide.
Are we doing a good job preparing our leaders for tomorrow?
Well, we really don't know tomorrow, do we? Right? So I think, are we trying to do everything we can to prepare our leaders? And I'd say, yeah, I do. Doesn't mean we always get it right. That doesn't mean it's always a glaring success. But usually the measure of that success is seen later, years down the road. Very hard to measure preparation by a program or a presentation, or it's usually seen looking historically as to how people have performed. So looking back to when I first started here, 2003 in the Guard, and then from what I see now, I would say we're doing an excellent job. And we're producing some very competent leaders, some good people. And one of the reasons really happy to stay.
So you were in leadership for a long time, had a variety of leadership opportunities. What strategy do you use that was like the most successful? Like looking back, all the things you tried, all the whatever, what worked the best?
Read the room. If I'm working with 5 or 6 people and they're all alphas, right? They're all, and it's usually easy to read alphas. You know what? Be a Bravo. If you have 8 pickup trucks, be the sedan, right? I mean, sometimes the role for you is very clear, but you've got to figure it out. You have to read the map, read the room, read the people, know the mission, whatever it may be. Something simple. And look what there's an overabundance of, and then be the piece that they need. I've done, I think, fairly well just being able to be a piece that was needed when maybe there weren't too many other pieces to fit.
Is the Army a good place to spend 30 years?
Well, I think the Army National Guard is. I don't know about the active component. In a large picture, being in service, yeah. Yes, I do. They say you won't be rich. You won't. You'll be comfortable. I think you will. Once you make captain, I think you're doing okay. At least that was the big mark, and it was true. But you don't do it for that. You really don't. Looking back, I would not have wanted to do anything else. I don't think I would have fit anywhere else. For as much as I will go down to the beach and I'll see all these massive multi-million-dollar homes, these fancy cars, and I'm like, what are they doing that I didn't do? And I say it tongue-in-cheek because I know quite a few of them, and they're trying so hard to find a meaningful purpose for what they do. And so they just compare, well, I got the latest of this and the latest of this. And, but there's never, they're not at peace, or many, at least the ones I know, at having a place. And you asked about leaving active service. Yeah. I'm at peace with it. Like I'm proud of where I was and what I got to do. I didn't do everything others do, but, I'm at peace with it. Like I'm proud of it. And that's, I wouldn't change a thing. And, I don't know. I think, it's a great place for the right people. You got to want to serve. You got to want to do something that, sometimes you know, it isn't, who wants to get called on a Saturday morning or Friday night or, you know, it's a snowstorm. And I'm using just simple things, but there have been some other things I've had to do that were not pleasant. But I don't know. It's, I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Okay. So I've eaten up about an hour of your time. And so I want to ask you if there's anything that you want to share with us before we go. Something I've missed. What am I not talking about?
Two.
Okay.
One is respect your people's time. There's times to call them in. There's times where they're on orders. There's times where they've got to be here day after day after day. Got it. But when they don't, leave them alone. Leave them alone. You can get the answer to a question on Monday. You can, you know, even if you're working on something at home, because you respect their time, but you're respecting their family's time too. And you're letting the family know that they're just as important and their time is as valuable as your mission time. So that's a big one. I didn't appreciate younger. I do now. You know, you talk retention and things like that. That's a respect thing. And then when you do call them, they're no questions asked. And there was one thing. So I learned this in Iraq. Everybody has a bad day. We all have a bad day. You asked about mistakes and things, and there's career mistakes, and there's every day. Everybody has a bad day, makes a mistake. That's okay, right? Some take a little longer to recover than others, but it's people, right? But as you get older, you get more experienced. There are people who, and these are my words, that just maybe their characters doesn't quite mesh with the service or values. And I saw that. I got to observe that in Iraq because we had detention operations. So you saw different levels of folks. Some were just, you know, detained for a few days, and some bad folks, right? And sometimes the evilest human being can be very charming and likable, which is a very unsettling thing. And the only reason you know they're evil is because they're behind bars. Anyway, but you spend enough time around that, you start to recognize a few traits, and you realize that it's not limited to a political or national or cultural. It's across humanity, and it's rare, but it's there. And so while we're all a family, sometimes in a family there's the ultra good, and sometimes there's not. And those are things that you have to be careful of as an officer. You have to be watchful of, because they do bad things to people. And we've seen recent, you know, some pretty horrible crimes, active component. There's some in the reserve, and it makes the national news, and, you know, the government tries to come up with programs and things. But as leaders, I think as you get older and wiser, those are the sorts of things you need to look for and be sensitive to. Because sometimes, yeah, that one's different for the wrong reasons. And that's sometimes a tough call. Sometimes it's somebody's brilliant, but you know, character matters. Right? There's a whole block on character in OERs, and sometimes there's some characters that are problematic. And I don't mean to make a huge point other than, you know, if it's ever presented to you in such a way that it was for me, and you notice it and it hits you, it sticks with you. It's rare. It's really rare, but it's not limited to the bad guys.
Yeah.
Protect your people.
Even from each other.
On rare occasions. Yeah. Yeah.
Not identical, but related. I haven't worked in detention ops. I haven't had the opportunity to look at bad guys through iron bars. But related is looking at other people who you might think of as a bad guy, someone not worth emulating, and seeing bit of yourself in it. Seeing a behavior, I'll throw out the word toxic. You see a toxic behavior and you're like, man, there's a piece of that in me that now I've got to find and squash.
Well, don't you think we all have a bit of that? I mean, we got a bit of everything, right? I mean, the span of human behavior, I think we all have the span. It's just, are you kind of, center, left, right most times, right? Controlled. And then are there points where it's more than just something you control? There's something that's off, right? I mean, you're gonna recognize bits of yourself in lots of things because we're all human. The fundamentals and the basics are all the same. We come up with terms like toxic behavior because it's all familiar. We all know what it is because we all understand it. We've all had our moments. It's
we're all
just
capable of it.
We are, and there's a difference. We're capable of anything, but as you mature, and the Army's excellent at helping people mature. It's how do you manage your behaviors? How do you control your emotions? How do you keep rational when things are going south? That's very difficult, but that's the mark of a competency. And there are people that sometimes when you're younger, right, it's a little harder to do. And then there are some that just they're way outside the standard, and we screen for that sort of stuff. But I don't know. Once in a while you see it, and boy, it just sticks with you. I don't mean to get off on that tangent, but it's one of those things that just stuck with me. It was a unique experience and very unsettling, and it's like you can't unlearn it.
Yeah.
So when you see it, even hints of it, it jumps out like nothing else.
I'm working my way through a book called The Gulag.
Okay.
And it's about, it's about the Gulag system under Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
And the central thesis of the book is it's a case study in how otherwise normal people can become the bad guys. It's I'm sure you've heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a book about Germany written called Ordinary Men. Same premise.
Yeah. It's a book that I'm finding very disturbing in how completely ordinary and in some cases well-meaning these villains were at one point.
You can get populations to do it.
Yeah.
Leadership can be dangerous. You get a charismatic, effective leader, you can get people follow. People want to follow. They want to follow. Many people want to be led. Not necessarily through the nose, but they want a leader. And the wrong leader with the right crowd can do bad things. They can do great things. But there's John Steinbeck wrote a passage, and he was a correspondent in World War II.
Love Steinbeck.
And he said, the dark world is not far from us. And it's not. And I think that applies to individuals as it does with groups of people. There's certain things that will take, the average person to rationalize and justify doing horrible, bad things where you would think, how does that happen? I think that's one of those things that the military sets apart. Like it trains you, and we focus on ethics and we focus on moral behavior and we focus on leadership and all these things, and they're not just nice things to say or put on a poster. It's because there are times when maybe everyone else is going this way, and you need people that know how to stay on the path.
Yeah. I think of the emphasis on Army values as the best, if not the only inoculation we have against someone who wants to climb the hierarchy of power.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things. When you have a hierarchy, there's always going to be someone who wants to climb it for the wrong reasons, right? Like there are just people who are born and they see a power structure and I have to get to the top of that thing.
Right.
And if you publish what that power structure is and the rules you play by, which the Army does, I mean, it's completely, you can go on Google right now and find out how long you have to spend at each rank and what. So the rules for climbing the hierarchy are extremely black and white, which to some degree would make us susceptible to the wrong person, the bad actor wanting to climb the hierarchy. Things like the Army values best inoculation against that, I think.
So the Guard I came into in 2003, right before the war really expanded, there was a lot of outflow. And then through having to deploy and in some tough times, some real times, you saw a new group. You saw people who stayed, and you saw the people coming in were of a different mindset, maybe a different focus, a different sense of what service was, because you were involved in things that were extraordinary, and I call it. Again, as a staff officer over there, and I didn't have the same challenges that a company may have had, but for me personally, and maybe some of my peers, I call it post-traumatic growth syndrome, because you grew in ways you could never imagine because of the types of stress. Now, it wasn't that kinetic violence that many of the soldiers and some of the junior officers were out dealing with every day. It was different. And that's where I was, and that's what I took away from it. And that was, it just changes you. It changes you, and it sets you. They used to call it the gap, difference between a military officer and the civilian world, because of things like this. And there's arguments as to whether that's a valid theory or not. But experiences will change you. And experiences with leadership, and I had great leadership when I was over there, which helped the development even more. So, being there under those conditions and with those leaders accelerated me in ways I could never imagine. Stress, too. I mean, it had its effects, but, those sorts of things in the Army, the military, you change you, I'll stop with the analogies, but, breeders will say, you buy a puppy, it grows up to a dog, but it's still a puppy. You get a wolf cub, it's a puppy, but very quickly grows into a wolf. Right? So there's certain things that make a wolf, and there's certain things that make just a large puppy. And I'm not saying we're wolves, but there's experiences that make you different. So I think you're starting to piece that together from comments you've made. And that's about the time it does kind of all come together anyway.
Well, it dawned on me. I've been in for 15 years, and I don't really want to work anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I always knew I didn't want to work anywhere else, but something about being at 15 years, and now the road ahead is just about the same length as the road behind.
Yeah. Well, and you're invested now.
Oh, yeah.
Like you'll see good things, and you'll be like, I see some of me in that too. Or you're with the Admiral at War College said, well, we're now one of them, not one of us, and that happens, like, right. So now you're a company person, right? You're as much defending why something happened that somebody who isn't as informed will say, well, that was stupid, right? I mean, you're invested.
Yeah. And the rewards are different when you're a company guy.
Oh,
so.
Yeah.
Just this past weekend, I went to an awards ceremony with the pad, and I got to watch as a good friend, a mentee of mine, handed out a couple of awards and some promotions. And the ceremony was at Joint Force Headquarters in front of like 50 people, including a 2-star, a 1-star, a couple of 06s, the State Command Sergeant Major. And I was like, when I was the pad commander, we lived in a broom closet. And I couldn't get the PAO to come to our awards ceremonies. And here we are 10 years later. It's been not quite 10 years since I was the pad commander, but it's been like 8 years. And man, did it feel good. I left feeling like, wow, we did something. I'm not sure I can put words to it, but like it's different. And I got to be a part of it.
So I go back to my rich guy at the beach house story. I have, like you, experiences like that where I just felt so satisfied that I contributed to something good and bigger than myself. And again, I have a few friends who they're just, I think they wish they had that. I mean, they have beautiful homes, and they don't mow their own lawn, and they don't plant their own trees or do their own kitchens. But anyway, but there's a thing that I think they would tell you, I just professionally I'm missing, that I want, and they continue to seek it. I don't have that misfortune. And again, I'm not speaking for all people with nice houses at the beach, but the few that I know that I like to tease, because I have to park my Toyota 2 blocks away, so it's not seen in front of their house. But I'd be surprised if you said anything else, and the desire to be part of something like that. If you keep that as your focus, don't worry about the peers. You're gonna do fine.
Yeah,
you will.
All right. So, sir, we're at almost an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you any longer.
I appreciate the invite. I like talking, as you can see.
Yeah. So I almost certainly will invite you back. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Good. Yeah, I have too. Thanks for prodding and getting some stuff out of me.
Okay.
Don't make me look too bad, please, on the podcast.
No, we're not in the habit of making our guests look
bad.
No,
no, it's good. No, thanks. I appreciate the get to talk about some things that were more personal. Yeah, maybe somebody will find it interesting.
All right, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.